Brief messages in the name of the missing Evan Turner were sent for months, assuring everyone that he had gone to his mother. But on the morning of the 14th of December, the thermal imaging camera showed something else. A hot spot in the sealed silo of Pine Creek Farm. Inside, Evan was found, and he had definitely not gone anywhere. His disappearance was concealed for 4 months with just a few words. 14th of December 2024. Early winter morning. Pine Creek Farm is a quiet and secluded place, 11 kilometers from Elmore, a small town in the state of Michigan. The farm belongs to Caleb Turner, a local mechanic who lives in seclusion and barely communicates with neighbors. He leads a simple life, repairs equipment for neighboring farmers, takes care of his property, and seemingly attracts no further attention. The technicians from Agritherm Audit Company, Jake Rollins and Stanley Ford, came to the farm for a standard winter inspection of heat losses. Their task was to check buildings and silos, identify possible heat leaks to help the farmer save on heating costs. A normal inspection takes about an hour. Nothing suspicious and certainly nothing criminal should be discovered here. But exactly at 6:42, the FLIR device used to identify heat loss anomalies showed a strange detail. One of the metal silos, covered with frost and standing empty for a long time, suddenly gave off a clear red silhouette, visible against the cold blue background. The heat outline was distinct, large, similar to the shape of a human. The technicians could not believe their eyes, but had to check, because this should not be. The silo had been standing empty for several months already. Stanley climbed the ladder to the upper part of the silo and opened the lid. No unpleasant odors. Inside it was dry and cold. However, in the middle, between a layer of lime, lay an unnaturally straight and completely motionless body. At first glance, it was clear. He had been here for a long time. The appearance, completely dried remains of a teenager. After a few minutes, the police arrived and the silo became a crime scene, and the routine heat loss inspection became the beginning of a serious investigation. The police officers quickly identified the identity. It was 14-year-old Evan Turner, son of the farm owner. The boy disappeared 4 months ago. All these months, the father assured neighbors and acquaintances that Evan was living with his mother in another city. The version was confirmed by SMS messages sent from Evan's personal phone. Brief, calm, absolutely neutral. No one would have thought that behind these words a lie was hidden. The farm was completely cordoned off. The neighbors could not believe that the quiet and reserved Caleb could be connected with something so terrible, but the police drew no hasty conclusions. They knew that in such cases one should not rush with accusations. Initially, the investigation began with checking the immediate environment. The main suspect was Caleb Turner. He was the only adult on the farm who had regular contact with his son before the disappearance. His statements that Evan had gone to his mother were now completely refuted by the facts. His daily routine was checked: conversations with neighbors, behavior and relationships with his son. Besides the father, suspicion fell on 2 local teenagers. Several times they were observed attempting to break into foreign properties, particularly into barns of neighboring farms. Both had previously been under observation for minor offenses. Age, height, build, and especially shoe size matched the print discovered on the inner wall of the silo. The police brought the teenagers to the station for detailed questioning, took shoe samples and compared them with the found print. This was not yet proof of guilt, but a significant clue. The shoe print in youth size found in the silo became the first lead of the investigation. In the initial phase, it seemed most promising. The investigators believed that one of the teenagers might have entered the silo shortly before the discovery of the body, possibly to explore the area. The teenagers were interrogated, but they categorically denied their involvement and insisted on never having been in exactly this silo. The police received no direct confirmations of their words for now, but could not yet accuse. Too few facts. The decisive turn of the investigation came when the police received data from the mobile operator Bell Mobility. Search warrant number 1420 BM allowed them to examine in detail how exactly the messages were sent in Evan's name. The provider reported that all these SMS were sent through the domestic Femto node installed in Caleb Turner's house. This meant one thing: the sender of the messages was constantly near the house. Now it was clear that Evan had not only never left the farm, but also someone specifically created the impression that he was alive and well. The investigation understood that they were dealing with a person capable of long and convincing manipulation, who could flawlessly maintain an illusion over several months. Now the main mystery of the investigation was: who exactly sent the messages? Why did he need this? And why did no one suspect the deception earlier? On the morning after Evan's discovery, the Elmore police delved into the details of Caleb Turner's lifestyle, who now officially became the main suspect. The investigators were interested in the nocturnal mode of his life, which now became the key puzzle of this case. Every night, Caleb Turner left the attic bedroom and went to the workshop located in a separate building on the farm. Yesterday evening, he had already given the police officers a brief explanation, citing noise as the only reason that prevented him from sleeping. But the investigation needed more specificity and evidence. The police officers checked Caleb's medical data in detail and requested through search warrant number BC 5092 from 2024-12-15 documents from the Barry Clinic. The received papers confirmed an important detail that was previously unknown to the police and the public. Caleb had suffered from post-traumatic insomnia since 2019. The illness developed after an accident on the farm that happened many years ago. Since then, Caleb regularly turned to doctors with complaints about chronic sleep problems, anxiety, and nighttime awakening. According to official clinic data, he received the last prescription for diazepam on the 18th of December 2023. He was prescribed 100 tablets of the preparation. The police officers understood that such a preparation as diazepam normally allows a person to sleep calmly and deeply. Therefore, an obvious discrepancy arose with Caleb's statements about Evan's snoring that allegedly disturbed him every night. The second conversation with Caleb took place in the small living room of the farmhouse, surrounded by officers and laboratory personnel who were taking fingerprints and photographing. Caleb remained calm, although he was noticeably nervous. To the investigator's repeated question about nocturnal movements, he answered briefly, "I already said." Evan snored loudly. "Diazepam really helped, but not so much that I could sleep next to him. I woke up every night and went to the workshop because it was quieter there. I felt more comfortable there." The investigators did not argue. Instead, they checked video recordings from the farmyard surveillance camera obtained through search warrant number CCT 192/2024. The recording clearly documented that on the night Evan disappeared, the Bobcat machine was started and worked from 4:50 to 5:10 in the morning. This did not match Caleb's original statements, where he only spoke of sleep or work in the workshop. This recording disrupted the integrity of his alibi and called into question the explanations about nocturnal awakening. The investigators asked Caleb who else could have used the Bobcat. The man calmly pointed to the keys hanging on a hook at the entrance to the workshop. "They're always there. I don't hide them. Anyone could have taken them and started the machine. That's no secret. Sometimes neighbors borrowed it without warning. You can ask anyone here, they'll confirm that to you." Caleb's version complicated the police's work. Theoretically, anyone could indeed have used the keys. The investigators were forced to leave this possibility open for now, although they internally considered such a scenario unlikely and too convenient for the suspect. For now, the trail remained marked as not closed and required further confirmation or refutation. Meanwhile, the crime scene technicians continued examining the Bobcat and made a discovery that strengthened suspicions against Caleb. Microscopic blood traces were discovered on the machine's operating pedal. The first laboratory analysis confirmed blood type AB, exactly such a blood type Evan had. This was a serious breakthrough in the investigation. Now it became obvious that exactly the bobcat was used to transport the remains weighing about 48 kilograms over a distance of about 25 meters on the farm grounds. This discovery seriously changed the direction of the investigation. Caleb was faced with explaining exactly how his machine was involved in what happened and why he knew nothing about it. However, the investigation at this time was not rushing to make direct accusations. Caleb's alibi only got cracks, but still held. Too much depended on the final expertise that was supposed to confirm that the blood found belonged exactly to Evan. The officers of Elmore Police now understood that they were dealing not only with the technical side of the incident, but also with Caleb's deep personal problems, his chronic insomnia, and the use of preparations that could influence his behavior and decisions. Elmore Police was forced to expand the circle of investigation after Caleb's version that Evan Turner had gone to his mother began to crumble before their eyes. Until the discovery of Evan's remains in the silo, this story was the only truth that the town's residents and the young man's relatives knew. Now the investigators were examining facts to understand whether the father's version was just a convenient cover. Evan went to his mother was a phrase that sounded convincing exactly until the moment when facts intervened. The investigators had to determine whether anything other than the short messages in Evan's name confirmed this move. For a complete picture, the investigators requested Air Canada flight logs through search warrant number AC-846 from 2024-12-16. Layla Mahdi's flight data showed a clear picture of her life in Calgary. According to airline reports, Layla never flew to Ontario in the period from September to December 2024. Not a single flight ticket purchased in her name during this period was registered. This immediately confirmed that the young man could not have traveled to his mother by plane. The police checked financial flows on Layla Mahdi's accounts through search warrant number B M772 from 2024-12-16. The statement showed regular monthly child support payments from Layla to Caleb Turner, but discovered no expenses related to Evan's trip. Neither tickets nor hotel bookings nor any other transactions that would have confirmed Caleb's version. Money was transferred steadily, but expenses for the son's arrival simply did not exist. The police officers conducted a remote interrogation of Layla Mahdi via video connection from Elmore Police Station to Calgary. Her statements confused the investigation even more. Layla told that she maintained regular contact with her son, predominantly through Telegram. The last complete dialogue in the chat took place on the 10th of January 2024 at 22:15. After that, the connection unexpectedly broke off. Soon, she began receiving messages from Evan exclusively in the form of short SMS. These messages were dry, formal, deprived of their usual emotionality. Layla tried to find out from her son why he had stopped writing normally, but received only monosyllabic phrases in response that everything was fine and there was nothing to worry about. She attached no special significance to these changes and explained them by youthful withdrawal and the son's distancing from parents. Now, however, after the terrible discovery on the farm, she had to admit the obvious. Since the 11th of January 2024, her son no longer answered himself. Neighbor Mrs. Olson, who lived not far from Pine Creek Farm, unexpectedly explained to police that she had seen a courier early in the morning on the 11th of January. According to her words, a man in work clothes drove up with an ordinary white delivery van and carried a large suitcase or container out of Caleb Turner's house. The woman claimed it seemed to her as if this very courier had picked up Evan. The police officers treated the neighbor's statements cautiously, as she could not provide a detailed description of the courier's appearance or the delivery van's number. Nevertheless, the fact of such a witness's existence was documented. To verify these statements, the investigators requested surveillance camera recordings from the nearest streets and highways. The dash cam recording of an oncoming truck traveling on Ontario Highway 43 documented a strange detail at 4:58 in the morning on the 11th of January 2024. A white delivery van parked at the roadside with an open rear container, The recording clearly showed that the container was empty and the driver was absent. The police began actively checking the registration of all similar vehicles and possible routes, but quickly encountered an obstacle. The license plate in the recording was not readable, and there were no clear characteristics of the driver. The courier disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared, and none of the local courier services confirmed work in this zone during the specified period. The fact of the mysterious courier's appearance remained questionable. The investigators allowed that Mrs. Olson's version could only be a coincidental meeting or consequence of her fantasies. But they could not ignore the fact of an unknown vehicle's appearance near the farm. At this moment, the investigation encountered a new problem. Even if the courier existed, no confirmations were found that Evan left the farm. Layla Mahdi confirmed that the son had not come to her. Flight logs and bank data confirmed her words. Caleb's version about the son's trip to his mother finally collapsed after it could not withstand verification by facts. Now the investigators had to carefully examine new oddities and find out what really happened on the morning of the 11th of January near Caleb Turner's house, and who exactly sent the messages to the mother, assuring her that everything was fine. With Evan, although this was obviously a lie, the investigation continued examining oddities and contradictions around Evan Turner's disappearance. Police attention returned again to technical details that had not seemed important earlier. Among the technicians who conducted thermal inspection on the farm, a new witness appeared. Thomas Reed, an employee of Agritherm Audit Company, who operated the FLIRE 54 thermal imaging camera. What else could the FLIR thermal inspection preserve, besides the already known recording that discovered Evan's remains? The investigators contacted Thomas Reed to carefully check the entire recording journal of the thermal imaging camera. Thomas provided them with thermal imaging camera data that had not been considered with due attention earlier. It turned out that flower inspection on the farm had not been conducted for the first time. Exactly a few months before Evan's discovery on the 14th of January 2024, a thermal check was also conducted on Pine Creek Farm. The thermal imaging camera journal data documented on the 14th of January 2024 at 5:07 in the morning show weak but clearly noticeable scattered heat in the same silo. At this time, according to farm documents, the silo should have been completely empty and unused. During the repeat inspection on the 24th of May 2024 at 6:42 in the morning, the thermal imaging camera already registered a bright and clear heat contour. The temperature in the silo reached +9 degrees Celsius, despite severe frost outside. This confirmed that between the two checks, something had seriously changed in the silo. There should have been no reasons for such heat, as according to all technical documentation and statements from the farm owner, no electric heating exists or has ever existed in this object. Thomas Reed explained to the investigators that such anomalies are normally connected with the presence of a living being or internal processes that produce heat. The first version the police considered was an animal that had accidentally gotten in, but CSI experts completely refuted this version. No traces of animal paws were discovered in the silo. The silo's hatch was reliably closed from outside. The variant with wild animal was definitively excluded. The police also tried to verify the version that the silo could have been a temporary shelter for one of the local homeless people. Theoretically, a person could have found shelter there on a frosty night. However, this version also quickly lost plausibility. The location was too isolated, access to the silo was difficult, and no other human traces were found during inspection. The version about a homeless person remained officially still open for the investigation, despite its improbability. However, no local resident, neither farm workers nor Caleb Turner himself, confirmed the presence of strangers on the farm during the winter months. There were also no reports of disappearances or complaints about intrusion. Nevertheless, the police maintained caution for now and kept this version open exclusively formally, waiting for additional confirmations or refutations. CSI experts conducted a detailed repeat inspection of the silo. On the inner side of the hatch, a small, barely noticeable piece of fabric was found. The forensic technicians quickly determined that it was a fiber from red-black flannel fabric, typical for Evan's pajamas, in which the teenager normally slept according to Caleb's statements. This discovery created a new important connection. The teenager did not simply end up in the silo randomly or through someone's carelessness. He was placed there intentionally during nighttime, in sleeping clothes. The fiber on the inner bolt of the hatch testified that the teenager had touched the cover, or might even have tried to open it from inside. However, the exact circumstances under which the piece of fabric got onto the hatch bolt were not yet established. The investigators did not rush to connect it directly with the nighttime work of the Bobcat machine, leaving these details for further expertise. But the discovery itself significantly strengthened the suspicions and made it possible to reconstruct more clearly the sequence of events of that January night. Now the investigation understood that it was dealing not only with a technical anomaly and an inexplicable heat spot, but also with factual evidence that Evan reached the silo still alive or was brought there recently. This discovery forced the police to pay even more attention to Caleb's statements and his nighttime movements on the farm. Soon, the investigators would definitively determine whether the time of Evan's transport coincided with the work of the Bobcat and Caleb's nighttime actions. The investigation returns for several months to the past, to the cold winter day in December 2023. Caleb Turner, farmer and mechanic, found himself again at the center of police attention, this time because of the acquisition of a large quantity of the drug diazepam. It was exactly then that the supply was purchased that would stand at the center of the investigation of his son, Evan's disappearance several months later. Why did Caleb need a whole 100 diazepam tablets? And why did he try to hide the extent of this purchase? On that day, Caleb drove with his black pickup Ford F-150 to Guardian Pharmacy and covered a distance of 7.8 kilometers from the farm. Normally, such purchases are accompanied by the use of a bank card or bonus cards for discounts. But this time, he preferred cash payment. The receipt was found during the police search of the farm several months later, and it lacked any signs that would allow identifying the buyer, except for the name of the drug itself and the purchase date. The receipt discovered by police clearly documented the fact of cash payment. Neither bonus nor discount cards were used. The pharmacy employee later remembered that Caleb declined any discounts and bonuses and explained that that's not necessary. It was exactly this gesture that drew the investigation's attention. Such caution suggested attempts to hide the fact of acquiring a large batch of sedative drugs. In parallel, the investigators checked medical data from the school archive of Elmore Middle School, where Evan studied. In the school nurse's report, created several months earlier, an important detail was contained that explained the sleep problems in the Turner family. Evan was diagnosed with a severe form of nocturnal apnea, breathing disorders accompanied by loud snoring and frequent breathing interruptions during sleep. The nurse officially recommended the use of a CPAP device, a special apparatus for normalizing breathing, but the family never acquired it. When the police again raised the question about the reasons for refusing to buy the CPAP device, Caleb Turner explained dryly and confidently, "That's too expensive for our family. I couldn't afford such expenses. We managed without it too." However, after comparing the costs for acquiring such a large batch of diazepam, the police doubted this explanation. Diazepam was also not a cheap drug, especially in such quantities. Even more questions were raised by the fact that 100 diazepam tablets disappeared literally 3 weeks after purchase. During this time, bystanders noticed that Caleb looked tired, exhausted, and inhibited, but no one noticed signs of obvious overdose in him. During this time documented by police, Caleb continued working, drove a car, and even performed repair work for neighbors. The investigation could not understand where the tablets disappeared if obvious excessive use by Caleb was not observed. When the investigators began to raise the question of the quantity of disappeared tablets, Caleb's lawyer presented an alternative version and suggested considering teenage experiments by Evan. According to the defense's view, Evan could have taken tablets independently, deciding to try something new or simply commit teenage foolishness without understanding the possible consequences. This version became a convenient explanation for the defense of the strange disappearance of the diazepam. In the first days of the investigation, such a scenario did not look completely incredible and was officially entered into the case materials as a version requiring further verification. However, the police soon received results of the toxicological examination from the Toronto Toxicological Centre, which fundamentally changed the perception of what happened. In the centre's conclusion, it was stated that extremely high diazepam content was discovered in Evan's organism. In the teenager's stomach, 42 milligrams of the substance were discovered, which significantly exceeded the permissible medical norm for a single dose. In the blood, the concentration reached lethal level. This meant one thing. Evan received diazepam in a quantity incompatible with life, and the version of accidental intake or teenage experiment, although it seemed convenient for Caleb and his defense, now began to seriously crumble. The police again directed their attention to Caleb. Now the investigators had to determine how such a quantity of diazepam got into the teenager's organism and why Caleb hid the extent of his drug acquisition with all his might. These details became a new and critically important direction of the investigation, and the police began to observe more carefully every action of Caleb's, his financial and personal decisions, understanding that the answers to many questions now lay exactly in that strange tablet purchase on the 18th of December 2023. The investigators carefully examined the last hours of Evan Turner's life and tried to understand in whose company he spent the evening before disappearing. Digital traces preserved by teenagers on social networks helped establish the truth. With whom did Evan spend the evening on the eve of disappearing? TikTok broadcast recordings confirmed that Evan was at the downtown diner cafe on the evening of the 10th of January in the company of two friends, Nick Watson and Sarah Lee. The video began at 22:11 and lasted until 23:40. The teenagers were relaxed, laughing and chatting. Evan drank tea with honey. This fact was confirmed by the receipt from the cafe and staff records. Video stream and Wi-Fi logs completely matched, confirming the exact location and time of the meeting. The investigators questioned the cafe employees in detail. It was clear that the drink ordered by Evan could not be altered by friends, as the tea was served personally to Evan immediately after preparation. After the meeting ended, Nick and Sarah returned home, which was confirmed by the surveillance camera at the cafe entrance and neighboring streets. The police considered whether Nick and Sarah could somehow influence Evan's condition. However, it turned out that it was almost 8 kilometers to Pine Creek Farm, and Nick Watson had no driver's license. At a late hour and without transport, the teenagers could not reach the farm unnoticed, which significantly reduced the probability of their involvement. Nevertheless, the investigation discovered an unusual moment on social networks. Nick Watson left a comment under the stream. "Caleb is texting my mom again at 2 a.m. The investigators initially took this seriously. Later, it turned out that this was only a teenage joke, based on Caleb's habit of sending messages to neighbors late at night. There was no other evidence of Caleb's involvement in strange nighttime messages to Nick's family. But the main discovery awaited the police ahead. The investigators requested access to Nick's iCloud account and examined data that the teenager stored on his phone. Among the files in Nick's cloud storage, a short video recording was found that was made at 2:48 at night on the 11th of January, several hours after the meeting at the cafe. On the video itself was ordinary editing of a teenage clip that Nick was preparing for social networks. But CSI experts paid attention to sounds that accidentally got into the background of the recording. In the nighttime silence, the sound of the Bobcat engine was clearly audible, the agricultural loader that belonged to Pine Creek Farm. This sound was already familiar to police from farm camera recordings. Additionally, metallic strikes could be distinguished in the recording, similar to the sound of an opened or closed hatch. And finally, another sound in the background completely matched Evan's snoring, which had been documented earlier in medical reports. Experts confidently explained that these sounds accidentally got onto the video through an open window of Nick's room. The teenager's house was located close enough to the farm for the sound to be heard clearly and distinctly on a quiet night. Thus, the accidental video recording unexpectedly became an important piece of evidence that confirmed Evan was on the farm at the moment when machinery was working there. Now the investigation could precisely determine the time of events on the farm on the night of the disappearance. The suspicions that previously fell on Evan's friends began to weaken. Obviously, the teenagers were far from the farm and were only accidental witnesses to what happened on the territory of Pine Creek Farm that night. Now the investigation received significant confirmation that precisely on the farm in the late night, actions were undertaken that led to Evan's disappearance. However, Caleb's exact role in this matter still remained not fully clarified. The investigators deliberately did not reveal to Nick and Sarah the significance of the details they found. The teenagers were left outside the suspicions, considering them only as witnesses through accidental circumstances. The main question of the investigation now reduced to Caleb's actions and events on the farm that the accidental recording from the teenagers' phone documented. The CSI group gained access to the logs of the domestic femtonode Bell Mobility that was installed on Pine Creek Farm. The investigation hoped that these logs would clarify from where exactly those mysterious SMS messages were sent that for several months convinced everyone that Evan was alive and located far from home. What exactly did the logs of the domestic femtonode show about the origin of the messages? The first analysis results were dry but clear. Messages in Evan's name were sent from the operating zone of the domestic node, whose signal strength was only 2 milliwatts. The operating radius of such a device did not exceed 30 meters. Technically, this meant that the sender of the messages had to be physically near the device at the time of SMS sending. The log showed specific sending dates: 16th of January, 3rd of February, 29th of March, and 12th of April 2024. These were exactly those messages that allegedly confirmed Evan's location in Calgary with his mother. CSI carefully examined the location of the femtonode and all surrounding buildings. The silo where Evan was discovered was located at a distance of 90 meters from the node, too far for such a weak signal. At the same time, the workshop where Caleb spent nights was only 18 meters from the femtonode. Experts posed a key question to Bell Mobility technicians. Was there a possibility of SIM card or IME phone substitution to send a message remotely? The specialist's answer was categorical: no. The provider network excluded IMEI spoofing, which meant that messages were sent strictly from the real device and from a specific physical location. The investigation immediately checked which devices were registered in the domestic network on the nights of message sending. The only device that was active in the network during these nights belonged precisely to Caleb Turner. It was his personal phone. Thus, the version that someone else could have sent these SMS messages finally collapsed. Earlier, a hypothesis was put forward that the silo could have been used as a shelter for a homeless person. This version was checked by the CSI group through repeated analysis of thermal recordings from the 14th of February, 14th of March, and 14th of April, 2024. All recordings showed complete absence of any thermal changes. The silo was in a state of complete thermostasis. No one went in or out during these periods, and no person could have remained there unnoticed. Thus, the hypothesis about a homeless person was completely excluded and officially closed. The investigation also definitively excluded the involvement of teenagers Nick and Sarah, as well as the mysterious courier who was allegedly seen by neighbor Olson. None of these leads had any more foundation. The key moment of the investigation was the discovery by CSI crime technicians during the repeated farm inspection. During detailed analysis of the kitchen and its dishes, CSI discovered microgranules of diazepam on the inner surface of the teapot. Spectral analysis showed complete correspondence with the tablets that were earlier purchased by Caleb. This was an extremely important piece of evidence that connected Evan's disappearance and the lethal diazepam level found in his organism with an ordinary household item. The calming tea that Evan drank at home turned out to be not as harmless as it initially appeared. CSI confirmed that the microparticles were not accidental contamination but targeted addition of the substance. Now the investigation knew exactly how diazepam entered the teenager's organism. This enabled the police to focus on Caleb's person, who had free access to the preparation and to the teapot on the farm. Thus, the investigation at the beginning of summer 2024 definitively focused on Caleb Turner. The evidence collected by CSI excluded all secondary versions and showed that the teenager's father not only sent false messages, but was also obviously related to what happened on that fateful January night. The investigation carefully avoided open discussion of Caleb's motive. However, the pieces of evidence formed a unified chain directed precisely against him. All details confirmed his direct participation in the events of that night. And now the police deliberately moved to the final stage of the investigation, carefully preparing the ground for direct accusations that should soon follow. Evan Turner's case was no longer a mystery with many versions. It became a clearly outlined case against a person who hid his actions behind the mask of a caring father and neighbor. Precisely, Caleb Turner found himself at the center of all facts and circumstances collected by the investigation. Now CSI awaited the last stage of the investigation, where it remained to formulate the final motive that had not yet officially been voiced. However, it was already obvious that behind Caleb's actions stood something greater than the simple desire to hide an accident. The investigation was approaching answers, and these answers should completely destroy the image of Caleb Turner as the residents of Elmore knew him. The investigation reached that stage where no one could doubt Caleb's key role. Ahead lay only formal stages of the procedure and official accusations. But the motive still remained hidden, and that was the last puzzle separating the investigators from completion of the investigation. The investigation closely approached the motive of Caleb Turner's actions. With each new fact, the image of the quiet, withdrawn mechanic from Pine Creek Farm stopped looking as neighbors and acquaintances portrayed him. Under external calm was hidden pressure that Caleb experienced due to constant sleep deprivation and financial problems. Now the investigation had to understand how far he could go to obtain what he urgently needed: absolute nighttime silence. What was Caleb prepared to do to achieve absolute silence? Financial documents from the company Kingston Rail Maintenance, where Caleb worked night shifts on the side, revealed an important detail. Due to constant tardiness, his salary was regularly penalized. 3 documented delays in November 2023 led to a deduction of 10%. This seriously affected his budget and increased financial tension. CSI examined Caleb's receipts and discovered that on the 9th of January 2024, one day before Evan's disappearance, he bought a set of earplugs at the Canadian Tire store. Expertise showed that the earplugs were opened but used only twice. Analysis of the earwax confirmed that they belonged precisely to Caleb. During questioning, Caleb explained the rejection of the earplugs simply and directly. "They don't help. I have tinnitus, noises in my ears. With earplugs, it only gets worse." The investigation again raised the question of why he didn't buy a CPAP, the medical device that the school nurse had recommended to Evan. Caleb answered again briefly and clearly, $1,200 aren't there. However, the investigators knew that Caleb spent not little money on 100 diazepam tablets that were bought for cash only a month earlier. This contradiction strengthened police suspicions. The defense made an attempt to explain what happened differently. According to the lawyer's version, Caleb did not intend to deliberately harm his son. They claimed that he had only tried to increase the diazepam dosage so that his son would sleep peacefully and finally allow the father to get enough sleep and return to normal work rhythm. This version presented Caleb's actions as a tragic coincidence of circumstances and accidental result of carelessness. However, this defense theory soon came under serious doubt after the police had access to new, key evidence. An intercepted call from Caleb to his brother, dated the 5th of November 2023, significantly changed the perception of what happened. The recording, obtained from Rogers' archives, documented Caleb's phrase, "If he doesn't shut up, I'll make that permanent one day." These words were said 2 months before Evan's disappearance. They could not be ignored or attributed to emotions of the moment. Caleb obviously allowed for extreme measures, and this fact destroyed the defense version about randomness and carelessness in his actions. Now the police finally focused on the direct connection between Caleb's chronic nighttime problems, his son's disappearance, and attempts to hide the true circumstances of what happened. The case no longer looked like a series of tragic coincidences. Instead, a picture of carefully planned actions aimed at solving the problem by any means emerged. The investigators already clearly saw that the quiet and reserved mechanic from the small Pine Creek farm was ready to go much further than his acquaintances could imagine. Financial pressure, physical exhaustion, and constant nighttime sleep disturbances became the background against which Evan's tragedy unfolded. It remained only to complete formal procedures to connect all the details. Diazepam purchase, words about silence forever, sending false messages from the teenager's phone, physical movement of remains with farm equipment. This is exactly what now faced the investigation as the final stage of the investigation that began with an ordinary heat loss inspection and led to uncovering the dark and hidden side of Caleb Turner's life. On the 11th of February 2025, a jury in Perth County found Caleb Turner guilty on 2 counts: involuntary manslaughter and improper handling of remains. As a result of detailed investigation, it turned out that the cause of the tragedy was Caleb's chronic insomnia, accompanied by torturous migraines and constant nighttime noise. The desire to achieve silence at any cost led to tragic consequences. On the 11th of January 2024, Caleb prepared tea for his son and added diazepam in an amount of about 42 milligrams, which exceeded the permissible therapeutic dose by 4 times. The teenager, who had serious breathing problems during sleep, fell asleep and never woke up. The combination of the sedative preparation and severe form of apnea became fatal. After Caleb realized what had happened, he decided to hide the traces of the incident. At night, he started the agricultural mini-loader Bobcat, transported the teenager's remains to an unused silo on the farm property, and covered them with lime, hoping to avoid discovery. The surveillance camera documented the Bobcat's work from 4:50 to 5:10 in the morning. Later expertise confirmed the presence of Evan's blood on the machine's pedal. To create the false impression that his son was far from home, Caleb monthly sent short text messages from Evan's phone, imitating the teenager's communication with his mother. Analysis of the domestic femtonode proved that all messages were sent from the workshop where Caleb himself was located. This excluded the possibility of sending messages from the silo, since the distance from it to the node exceeded the network coverage zone. Thermal imaging taken by Agritherm Audit Company on the 14th of January 2024 confirmed the presence of a weak heat spot in the silo caused by the presence of recently placed remains. The repeat examination on the 24th of May of the same year showed a temperature increase in the silo to +9 degrees Celsius, caused by internal decomposition processes. During court proceedings, the defense persistently proved that Caleb's actions were not intentional and that he did not intend to cause serious harm to his son. However, the prosecution managed to definitively shatter this version through presented evidence. The recording of the telephone conversation from the 5th of November 2023 between Caleb and his brother, in which Caleb declared, "If he doesn't shut up, I'll make that permanent one day," played a decisive role in court. Additionally, pay stubs were presented showing Caleb's regular financial penalties for being late to work, caused by chronic sleep deprivation. The jury, considering Caleb's partial confession and the absence of direct evidence of premeditated murder, rendered the verdict: 16 years imprisonment with serving in a strict regime correctional facility. After the verdict was announced, Caleb was escorted from the courthouse to pretrial detention. The gates of the institution closed definitively behind him, marking the end of the long and tense investigation. Pine Creek Farm remained completely abandoned after these events. A few weeks later, inspectors from Agritherm Audit Company conducted one more control inspection of the area. The silo where Evan was previously found turned out to be perfectly cold. No signs of heat or life were documented anymore. Thus ended the tragic story that began with an ordinary heat loss inspection, with the complete resolution of one of the most mysterious cases in the history of Perth County. A single shot on the morning of the 2nd of November at the Bly farm changed the family's life in seconds. Ellie J., who was only 8 years old, died from a shot from a .22 LR caliber carbine that her father, Travis Bly, had left in the house after returning from hunting. How the weapon got into the hands of such a young person and who exactly pulled the trigger becomes the central mystery of this investigation. Travis returned from hunting around 7 o'clock in the morning. He left the carbine lying in the living room without putting it in the safe and without making sure there were no cartridges in it. The police officers who arrived 15 minutes after the incident found that the weapon was already without cartridges in the chamber. The ammunition was later discovered in Travis's car, lying separately in the pickup's cup holder. This was confirmed by the cameras on the officers' uniforms. The crime scene technicians found clear fingerprints of small size on the carbine's trigger guard. The prints clearly belonged to someone much younger than the adult family members. The first person the investigators paid attention to was Travis Bly. It was precisely his actions and negligence that created the conditions for the tragedy. An unloaded but accessible weapon was a clear violation of the law on safe firearm storage. Police also focused on Ellie's mother, Lisa J. At the time of the shot, she was nearby in the summer kitchen. Despite her assurances that she had not seen the moment of the incident, her role in the event still had to be carefully examined. One of the officers quickly noticed a rifle that was hidden behind the barbecue grill, where Lisa normally worked. The rifle looked suspicious, and initially the police suspected that this might have been the weapon from which the shot was fired. However, just a few hours later, this lead proved false. The examination conducted by the pathologist showed a clear bullet hole from a .22 LR caliber cartridge. The rifle found behind the barbecue was an air gun and could not use such a cartridge. Thus, the investigation returned to the carbine. The fingerprints and scattered cartridges did not yet provide a clear picture, but it was obvious that the answer lay precisely in the details connected with the morning events in the Bly family. How could Travis Bly, a hunter with many years of experience, leave the carbine unassembled and accessible to anyone who was in the house? After the initial examination of the crime scene, police officers invited Travis Bly to the station. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and his interrogation began. At this time, Travis did not appear frightened or agitated, rather puzzled and tired. He sat calmly at the table, placed his cap in front of him and waited with folded hands for the investigator's questions. Detective Edwards began with the obvious question: why wasn't the weapon in the safe? Travis's answer sounded clear, but did not completely convince the investigation. He explained that he was in a hurry and had simply forgotten to disassemble the carbine, justifying this with the need to immediately take care of the yard. According to Travis's words, after returning from hunting, he noticed sheep that had gathered at the water trough, but no water was coming. Travis understood that the animals could suffer if he didn't repair this quickly. He ran outside and left the weapon on the sofa. However, his story contained an oddity that drew particular attention from the investigation. Travis, a man with considerable hunting experience, had for some reason not removed the bolt. This is a standard and simple action for any gun owner, especially after returning from hunting. Why would an experienced shooter leave a weapon completely ready to fire? An important detail in the story was the report from the farm neighbor who saw Travis around 7:50. The neighbor confirmed that Travis appeared agitated, walked quickly and nervously adjusted his jacket, obviously in a hurry to take care of the water trough. This confirmed Travis's initial explanation of his urgent actions in the morning. However, the police report noted another important observation: traces of fresh oil on the weapon's bolt. This did not look like old weapon maintenance. The carbine had been oiled recently, literally within a few days. But the laboratory examination could only begin 2 days later, on the 4th of November. Until then, the investigation had to wait. The investigator continued asking for confirmation of whereabouts at the time of the shot. Travis answered without hesitation that at this time he was busy repairing the compressor in the barn. As confirmation, he presented clothing on which the investigator immediately noticed machine oil stains. The samples were quickly sent for examination. An hour later, the expert opinion came. The oil from the jacket completely matched the oil used for the compressor's operation. This partially confirmed Travis's words about his location at the time of the event. But even with confirmed alibi, the investigation did not drop the main question. Why had an experienced hunter allowed such unforgivable negligence with the weapon? The detectives suspected that Travis might have used the haste and the situation with the water trough as a convenient excuse. Checking the family schedule revealed that Travis had planned a trip to the feed supplier precisely at 9 o'clock that morning. The store manager confirmed this information and specified that Travis was supposed to pick up a large feed delivery. Such a trip was clearly not spontaneous and required advance preparation. After checking telephone records, however, police officers found that Travis had informed the supplier in advance about possible delays due to problems on the farm. Thus, the version that Travis had allegedly invented the haste as justification for his own negligence began to seem less convincing. But not completely. A crucial turning point was information discovered in Travis's phone. Precisely at 7:40, a few minutes before the neighbor saw him hurrying into the yard, Travis received a message from his mother. The text of the message contained the sentence, "Don't forget the cartridges in the glove compartment." This short message significantly changed the perception of the morning events. The investigation immediately became interested in why Travis had not mentioned this detail and why the cartridges were not in the glove compartment, but in his car's cup holder in a different part of the vehicle. Why did the family hide the existence of insurance for Ellie? And why did this information come to light so quickly? The morning of the 3rd of November at the Bly farm began with public and journalist attention shifting from the father to the mother. Lisa J., who had remained in the background until then, unexpectedly found herself at the center of public attention. The reason was information that had leaked to the press about a hidden insurance policy in Ellie's name. Lisa had carefully avoided contact with journalists the entire previous day. She constantly repeated that her family had become victims of an accident, and all speculation about other versions was simply unacceptable. But now that journalists had dug up the financial document, everything became much more complicated. The insurance policy for 30,000 Australian dollars had been taken out 2 years earlier, in 2022. However, Lisa herself had initially denied its existence. When officers first asked about the presence of such a document, the woman answered briefly but firmly that they had never taken out insurance payouts. However, by midday on the 3rd of November, police received official confirmation from the insurance company that such a policy indeed existed. Its purchaser was Lisa's father, George Carter, Ellie's grandfather. Carter lived in another state and rarely visited the farm. He had taken out the policy as a gift for his granddaughter without informing the public. Now that the information had become public, he hurried to distance himself from all suspicions and explained that he had simply wanted to secure Ellie's future and had not expected such an outcome. This confirmation of the policy forced investigators to return to Lisa and find out why she had so categorically denied its existence. This time, the explanation was more open. Lisa explained that she had feared accusations from the public and media about allegedly profiting from what had happened. According to her words, the family was already under pressure, and she didn't want them to be judged even more for alleged hidden financial interest. Lisa appeared dejected and clearly tired, but her explanation did not completely eliminate the investigation's questions. The attention to the insurance caused much speculation among locals and journalists. In the small town, every new detail could become cause for numerous rumors. Given the fact that Lisa had not immediately told about the insurance, many suspected that the family might have a financial motive. Local newspapers began discussing this particularly actively, emphasizing the sum that was considerable for a small agricultural business. The investigation soon showed that there had been no payouts from the insurance yet, and the insurance company itself had already begun its own internal investigation. Company representatives informed the police that a payout from this policy was only possible in case of a recognized accident. Any intentional action or gross negligence deprived the family of the right to the money. This meant that the financial motive about which so much had been written in the press was actually very dubious. The investigators tried to clarify with Lisa whether she had understood the insurance policy conditions in advance. Lisa confirmed that her father had told her about the insurance conditions, but insisted that she had never perceived this as a possibility to obtain any benefit. From her perspective, the idea of using such a document for such purposes was completely unthinkable for her. The investigation decided to check Lisa's words and requested telephone records of her conversations with her father. The check showed that no discussions about the policy conditions had been conducted in recent months. This confirmed that Lisa probably really had not perceived the insurance as a factor of financial benefit and was telling the truth when she claimed to have hidden this information only out of fear of social condemnation. However, the press had already seized upon the catchy headline. Newspapers began actively spreading the version that what happened might have been a staging to obtain insurance money. This hypothesis quickly gained popularity among locals and forced the investigation to spend time checking facts that, as it later turned out, were completely unfounded. The detailed analysis conducted by the police together with insurance company employees showed that such staging could not have brought the family any benefit. Moreover, the policy conditions themselves clearly excluded payout if intentional actions or gross negligence were proven. Nevertheless, much time was needed to refute this false version and convince journalists to stop spreading it. After the official response from the insurance company, the situation became even more complicated. The insurance confirmed that they would pay the family money only if an accident was confirmed. If intentional actions or negligence were established, the payouts would be stopped. This circumstance forced the investigation to return once again to the technical details of the shot. To understand whether this could be an accident, it was necessary to determine exactly under what circumstances the trigger was pulled and what position the shooter had. This became the next starting point of the investigation. Now the investigation focused not on financial motives, but on the technique of the shot itself, which could put an end to all hypotheses. How close was the shooter to Ellie at the time of the shot? And what do the wound details say? The fifth day of the investigation began with an important document. The pathologist from Queensland presented report number 21QLD, which became one of the key documents for understanding the circumstances of what happened. The report clearly stated that the shooting distance was no more than 15 meters. The experts reached this conclusion based on a clearly fixed soot stain on Ellie's clothing. The absence of tissue tears shows that the bullet had stabilized in the air, but had not traveled a sufficiently large distance for its speed to fall critically. This excluded the possibility of a shot from great distances that had been considered previously. To accurately determine the time of the event, forensic technicians used liver temperature and meteorological data. The result was maximally precise. The time of the incident was 8:12 in the morning with an allowable deviation of only 2 minutes. Additionally important was the information that the fatty tissue around the wound was not exposed to the burning effect of powder gases. This meant that the shot was fired from a low trajectory, practically horizontal. Thus, the shooter was most likely in a sitting position or kneeling, which corresponds to the height of the carbine's position on the sofa where the arriving officers found it. The report stated why Ellie made no sound at the time of the incident. This moment particularly troubled the investigators, as the house residents who were in the yard heard no screams. The answer lay in the physiology of the injury sustained. The bullet immediately damaged the lung and caused its immediate collapse. This excluded, in the expert's opinion, the possibility of any screams or sounds of pain. Such details significantly influenced the investigation picture. They emphasized that the situation was very quick and practically silent, excluding the possibility of hearing anything except the shot itself. However, the investigation again encountered a contradiction. The veteran who lived in the Bly family's neighborhood insisted that he heard 2 distinct consecutive bangs that seemed like shots to him. This version immediately raised doubts and required verification. To evaluate the neighbor's testimony, investigators brought in a forensic phoniatrician, a specialist in sounds and acoustics. The expert conducted a comparative analysis of the sound of a shot from a .22 LR caliber carbine and the slam of a metal barn door. He concluded that for an inexperienced witness, these sounds could indeed sound very similar. The expert pointed out that the metallic slam of the barn door could well create an acoustic effect of a second shot. Despite the obvious convincingness of this argument, investigators decided not to close this line for now until final confirmation from other sources. At the same time, the investigation team received new evidence that again directed their attention to the interior of the Bly house. During repeated examination of the living room directly by the sofa, forensic technicians discovered the imprint of a small child's boot, more precisely size 31. The imprint was clear thanks to dried earth that had been carried into the house. Investigators immediately began checking the shoe sizes of everyone who could have been in the house at that time. Such a trace clearly testified to the presence of another small person near the weapon immediately before the shot. However, the investigation did not want to reveal details for now until all expert results were available. Thus, the investigation now had not only the pathologist's report, which clearly recorded the details of the incident, but also factual evidence in the form of a shoe print that again raised the question of who could have been near the carbine in the last seconds before what happened. What could Cooper have imitated on the morning of the tragedy, and could this have influenced his actions? The 7th of November was cool, but clear. Cooper Bly's grandmother's house was located several kilometers from the farm, away from the bustle, press, and police. After the incident, Cooper was temporarily staying right here, under her care. The official reason was simple, for his psychological comfort. But actually, the investigation feared that the emotional atmosphere on the farm could hinder objective investigations. Police officers examined with particular caution the devices that Cooper used. On the same day, a tablet was confiscated. Digital forensics specialists immediately began checking the viewing history. After just a few hours, they managed to obtain important information. On the morning of the incident, starting around 7:30, Cooper watched videos on YouTube Kids. These were videos from the Farming Life Sim series in which hunting and shooting at rabbits was demonstrated. The viewing lasted about half an hour, and during this time the boy was completely alone. The grandmother who was watching Cooper was completely sure that her grandson was feeding the chickens by the shed, as often happened in the mornings. She suspected nothing and was busy with household affairs, without checking what exactly was happening in the yard. The time coincided with the period when the boy could have been near the carbine that the father had left in the house. Psychologists who were brought in to evaluate Cooper's condition after what happened examined the situation attentively and came to a clear conclusion. The specialist emphasized that Cooper, due to his age and psychological development, could not fully understand the consequences of his actions. The concept of finality and irreversibility of consequences was completely abstract for him. For the boy, the scenes seen on the tablet in the morning could only be a game, something distant and unreal. His understanding of the world was too superficial to draw a parallel between virtual entertainment and real consequences. The investigators asked the psychologist in detail whether Cooper could have aggressive motives or feel negative emotions toward his sister. But the specialist answered clearly that this was extremely unlikely. According to his words, Cooper felt rather confusion and incomprehension than aggression. During the conversation, the boy showed bewilderment, spoke choppily and unclearly, often returning to describing his usual games and daily duties. In his consciousness, the tragedy remained something unclear and frightening, but not directly connected with his actions. Nevertheless, a version about possible intentional aggression on Cooper's part emerged again in the press and social networks. Assumptions appeared in newspapers that he was allegedly jealous or felt strong envy toward Ellie and that what happened could have been a conscious act. This forced the police to make a public response. The investigation conducted a repeated, this time carefully video-recorded conversation between Cooper and specialists. On this recording, it is clearly visible. The child feels deep guilt and fear, but his speech is completely free from signs of conscious aggression. He chaotically repeats the same phrases, often stumbles over words, gets distracted, and cries. This recording became decisive for the official closure of the false trail about malicious motives. The version of intentional actions was officially recognized as unfounded and publicly refuted. A new investigation, however, initiated in parallel by the Department of Family and Social Protection, caused another important and painful problem. Now it had to be decided whether Cooper, after completing guardianship with his grandmother, could return to the family in the future. This topic was actively discussed among specialists and the local community and raised the question again of how far the Bly family could be considered safe for children at all. The investigators did not rush to final conclusions for now and kept focus on the most important thing. It had to be clearly understood how the cartridge got into the weapon if Travis assured that he had left it empty. Why did Lisa, Ellie's mother, who was not far from the crime scene, hear no sounds or screams that could have alarmed her? On the 8th day after the tragedy, the investigators' attention shifted to the acoustics and peculiarities of the environment of the Bly farm. The key question was why Lisa J., who was near the crime scene, heard neither crying nor any disturbing sounds. After detailed examination of Lisa's statements, the investigators established that she was occupied with work in the back part of the property in the morning at the time of the incident, where the summer kitchen is located. This place is separated from the event area by a high slate fence. The police paid special attention to the construction of the fence, which had great density and a height of about 2 meters. To check the hearing conditions, the investigation turned to a forensic engineer acoustician. The expert conducted field tests directly on the territory of the Bly farm on the morning of the 8th of November. He used special equipment to measure sound level in decibels. The experiment consisted of imitating the acoustic conditions of the incident and measuring noise level in various areas of the yard and outside the fence. The results were convincing. The acoustics expert established that wind with a speed of 9 kilometers per hour, directed from the crime scene to the summer kitchen, together with the slate fence, significantly dampened all high-frequency sounds. The conducted measurements showed that a sound with an intensity of 93 decibels, imitating the bang of a shot, already became 66 decibels at a distance of about 30 meters behind the slate wall. This corresponds to about the level of ordinary household sounds that can easily be ignored, especially when a person is occupied with some work. These data completely explained why Lisa could not hear crying or other disturbing sounds from the crime scene. The pathologist had previously confirmed the absence of loud screams as a result of Ellie's immediate lung damage. Now it was clear that even any quiet, insignificant sounds could not overcome the acoustic barrier. A separate question that was discussed for a long time was the statements of the veteran neighbor who claimed to have heard 2 bangs. After detailed analysis, it became clear that the second sound could have a completely different nature. The conducted technical experiment provided an explanation for this. On the farm territory, only a few meters from the shed, there was a metal door of the grain storage. Checking the surveillance cameras at the grain storage with precise time synchronization according to NTP protocol showed that exactly at 8:13, the door had slammed shut under wind influence. The forensic engineer confirmed that the sound of the metal door slam could indeed be perceived as a second bang, especially by a person without special training. Lisa's statements were doubted for a short time after the emergence of the neighbor's witness testimony about the second bang. But after receiving the video recording from the grain storage, the doubts disappeared completely. This recording became convincing proof that Lisa was where she claimed to be and had no relation to the second suspicious sound. The emotional tension, however, caused by suspicions in the media strongly affected Lisa's mental state for several more days. Finally, the police officially published a statement that the suspicions against the mother were completely unfounded and closed. On the same day, the Criminal Technology Laboratory sent new data about the weapon that once again forced investigators to reconsider the circumstances of the incident. The criminal technical expert opinion indicated that there was fresh oil in the carbine's cartridge chamber. Moreover, the oil had been applied very recently, maximum 1 hour before the incident. This fact was important and could indicate that the weapon had been prepared for use shortly before the tragedy, which none of the witnesses had previously reported. The experts placed importance on this discovery. Since fresh oil clearly did not correspond to Travis's initial statements that he had not checked the carbine after returning from hunting, the investigators decided temporarily not to reveal this fact and to concentrate on a more careful examination of the carbine's technical condition. All details about its maintenance on that day could significantly change the course of the investigation. Does the trace of the child's boot discovered next to the sofa match Cooper Bly's shoes? 10 days after the tragic events on the Bly farm, criminal technician Brett O'Neill from the Queensland Police becomes an important figure in the investigation. Brett specializes in precise criminal technical reconstructions, and it is to him that the detailed examination of the child's boot trace discovered at the sofa in the Bly family house living room is entrusted. The trace left on the dirty surface next to the sofa was already noted in the first hours of the investigation. Now O'Neill occupied himself with its examination. Using the most modern equipment, the criminal technician carefully processed the impression and made its highly precise three-dimensional cast. It made it possible to transfer the shoe sole pattern as well as the smallest peculiarities and defects of the sole left in the dirt with maximum accuracy. The trace, according to O'Neill's expert opinion, perfectly matched the pattern of Gumboots Kids' brand shoes, size 31. It was important to confirm whether this trace really belonged to Cooper's boots. With permission from the grandmother, Cooper's guardian, his footwear was handed over to criminal technicians for laboratory analysis. Brett O'Neill conducted a careful comparative expertise. Matches were established at 14 unique points of the sole pattern. This is considered absolutely convincing in criminal technology and confirms that the trace next to the sofa could have been left precisely by Cooper. The investigation, which had previously cautiously approached the version that the boy could have independently reached the weapon, now received an important and objective argument in its favor. Travis Bly, Cooper's father, however, expressed doubts about his son's physical ability to reach the carbine that lay on the sofa. He insisted that Cooper's height of 116 centimeters would not have allowed him to easily manipulate the 97 centimeter long weapon that was at the height of the 51 centimeter high sofa. To dispel these doubts, the investigation group organized a reconstruction of the event directly in the criminal technical laboratory. The reconstruction clearly showed that even with the small height of 116 centimeters, Cooper could have easily reached the carbine if he had stepped very close to the sofa. The weight of the carbine itself allowed even a small person to lift it and direct it forward. This result significantly weakened the father's defense position and confirmed the realism of the possibility that Cooper could have taken the weapon in his hands. Despite the convincingness of the results, Travis's lawyers made another attempt to defend his position. They put forward a version about the possible presence of another, unknown small person who allegedly had been in the house that morning. The investigation reacted immediately and checked records from video surveillance cameras of the local elementary school. The check was maximally thorough. Police officers looked through all school cameras and compared attendance lists. The recordings clearly showed that all children potentially connected with the family were at school at the time of the shot. Thus, the defense version about a foreign small person was finally rejected as groundless. After this false lead, the Bly family's lawyers were forced to publicly acknowledge that only family members were in the house at the time of the tragedy. At the end of the workday, Brett O'Neill completed the detailed examination of the carbine when he discovered another important piece of evidence. Upon careful examination of the bolt under the microscope, the forensic technician noticed a small, practically invisible micro-crack. The expert noted that this crack could not have occurred on the day of the incident. The weapon had been damaged earlier, about 2 weeks prior, probably after a fall or strong impact. This new circumstance forced the investigation to question once again how carefully Travis monitored his weapon. Given his hunting experience, he should have regularly checked the condition of his carbine. Officially, these details were not disclosed for the time being, as they could strongly influence the further course of the investigation. The appearance of the microcrack redirected the investigation's attention to the technical condition of the carbine and to the circumstances of its storage and use in the Bly house. Brett O'Neill carefully documented his discovery, after which the carbine was again placed in a sealed container for further examination. The container was delivered via Bruce Highway from the laboratory to the police storage in 17 minutes, from 10:15 to 10:32. Now the investigation received another important point for further clarification, in which technical details could play no lesser role than personal aspects of the case. For now, the microcrack remained only technical evidence, but it was already obvious that its origin would be a key question of the next investigative phases. All participants of the investigative group understood that the more such small details appeared, the more difficult it would be to hide the whole truth about the events of that morning. The new evidence only emphasized that the investigation was approaching resolution, but it was still early to draw final conclusions. Why did Travis Bly, who knew about the presence of the crack in his carbine's bolt, take no measures to eliminate this defect in time? The investigation of events on the Bly farm gradually approached the key moment. At the center of attention was again Travis Bly, Ellie's father, whose actions increasingly looked not like accidental negligence, but like systematic carelessness that led to tragedy. At the court hearing on the 12th of November, the prosecution presented new evidence that was supposed to shed light on Travis's behavior a few days before the incident. The most significant evidence was Travis's correspondence with the local gunsmith, discovered in his messenger. In the message from the 30th of October, Travis directly stated, "Coming by in the next few days, crack in the bolt." This became irrefutable proof that Travis knew in advance about the technical problem of his weapon. In response to the investigation's question, the gunsmith confirmed that Travis had asked for advice and was interested in the time frame and cost of repair. The master indicated that replacing the part would take only 1 day and cost about $250 Australian. Now the key question stood before the court. Why Travis took no action despite obvious risks related to the weapon's technical condition? The prosecution provided a detailed explanation based on technical expertise of the weapon. Experts confirmed that Travis had every reason to expect that the crack could cause problems with the carbine's functioning, including the risk of sudden jamming. Nevertheless, Travis did not bring the weapon for repair, not even for preventive inspection. Instead, the carbine remained in ordinary functional condition, fully assembled and ready to fire. The prosecutor drew the court's attention to Travis's negligence, emphasizing that the weapon left without repair was accessible to every family member, including the youngest representatives. It was obvious that Travis either did not recognize the full seriousness of the situation or consciously ignored the risks, hoping that nothing would happen. When the prosecutor directly asked why Travis did not disassemble the carbine and remove the bolt, Ellie's father answered briefly, explaining that he feared contamination of the weapon by dust and sand, which were inevitable on the farm. Travis spoke confidently about how it was unacceptable for him as an experienced hunter to leave the weapon open, as it would lose its functionality and require more expensive repair. However, the prosecution immediately pointed out the unsustainability of this justification. The decision itself to leave the carbine in the house, assembled and accessible, could not be justified by simple domestic considerations about dust. The prosecutor insisted that Travis had made a conscious choice that significantly increased the risk of tragedy. At this moment, Travis's lawyer attempted to offer an alternative explanation for the crack's origin, claiming that the damage could have occurred during the process of weapon seizure by police officers. He suggested that mechanical impact during transport or careless handling could have led to the microcrack's formation. This version was quickly checked and swiftly dismissed. The investigators presented the court with a photo of the carbine that Travis had previously published in a group of local hunters on social networks on the 30th of October. In this image, the same microcrack on the bolt was clearly visible, long before the events and police intervention. Thus, the defense's version was completely refuted as unsustainable and misleading. The trial reached its emotional peak when the forensic expert explained in detail the consequences of the microcrack's presence on the carbine bolt. He emphasized that even insignificant damage could lead to unexpected weapon jamming, which would be extremely dangerous at the moment of firing. The expert stressed that Travis most likely fully recognized the risks and therefore postponed repair, fearing worsening of the damage through independent disassembly. According to the expert opinion, Travis feared turning a small technical malfunction into a serious problem through his actions, which would require greater investment and longer carbine downtime. Instead, he preferred to leave the weapon as it is and actually made a conscious choice in favor of risk that ultimately ended in tragedy. These conclusions intensified pressure on Travis and clearly formed the picture of his negligence. For the court, this became a clear indication that Travis's actions were not accidental carelessness, but conscious negligence with tragic consequences. Silence fell in the courtroom. Everyone understood that the final phase of the trial was unfolding before them, and that the final court decision in Travis Bly's case would depend on these last details. The investigation and prosecution confidently led listeners to understand that Travis's actions were perhaps less malicious than irresponsible. But precisely this negligence led to the tragic events on the farm. Now the court had to make a final decision based on all collected evidence and facts. The court proceedings ended, but before them lay the final act in which the ultimate motive for Travis's actions was to be presented. Until this moment, the prosecution maintained tension and obviously had one more important argument in reserve that would finally clarify the whole picture of tragic events on the Bly farm. 6 months after the tragic events on the Bly farm, the Bundaberg court finally rendered its verdict. Travis Bly was officially found guilty of violating the Weapons Act 1990, paragraph 60. According to the court ruling, precisely Travis's negligence and his irresponsibility in handling the firearm were the root cause of what happened. The court examined each episode in detail and reconstructed the complete picture of events, motives, and causes of Travis's actions. The tragedy was based not so much on malicious action as on a whole chain of gross errors and open negligence. Travis not only knew about the weapon's defect, but also consciously took no measures to eliminate it, in order to avoid financial expenses and potential administrative penalties for storing a defective carbine. According to investigative materials, the picture of what happened now looked as follows. In the early morning of the 2nd of November 2024, Travis Bly, returning from hunting, carefully cleaned the carbine. During the maintenance process, he again noticed the micro crack in the bolt that was already known to him. Although the problem had been identified several days before the incident, Travis again decided not to deal with repair. Instead, he hastily assembled the weapon without once removing the bolt, as he normally did after hunting. The reason was simple. Travis was hurrying to take care of the animals and also feared that if the weapon defect became known, he would face an administrative penalty. In Australia, storing damaged firearms is punished with fines and temporary confiscation, which would have meant not only financial losses for him, but also disruption of his usual way of life. In his haste, Travis threw the cartridges into the cup holder of his pickup and went to the sheep, completely forgetting that his 6-year-old son Cooper remained alone in the yard and could easily enter the house where the assembled carbine lay. Precisely this became Travis's fatal mistake. Cooper, left without supervision, was fascinated by videos watched on the tablet in the morning that demonstrated hunting animals. Without understanding the consequences, Cooper approached the sofa where the carbine was located, picked it up and, without experiencing difficulties in handling the weapon, fired the single tragic shot that cost Ellie her life. In court, the evidence presentation reached its climax when the jury was shown a 3-dimensional reconstruction of the events of that morning. They saw the real height of the sofa, 51 centimeters, the length of the carbine, 97 centimeters, as well as Cooper's height of 116 centimeters. From the visual reconstruction, it became obvious that the boy could not only reach the carbine, but did so completely easily and naturally, fully repeating the movements he had previously seen in game videos. After this visual presentation, the jury had no doubts about the reality of what happened and Travis's complete responsibility for the negligence that had irreversible consequences. The court imposed the final sentence against Travis Bly, 3 years probation and a fine of 15,000 Australian dollars. Such a sentence was chosen taking into account the absence of intentional, malicious intent, but emphasized the severity of his committed violations. The carbine was confiscated and destroyed by court order. In the question of guardianship for Cooper, no final decision had yet been made. The court decided that the child should remain under his grandmother's guardianship for at least 1 more year. Only after that will the Department of Family and Social Services conduct a new assessment of the situation to decide whether he can return to his parents. Regarding alternative versions, the court and investigation confirmed their complete exclusion. All previously emerged false leads and versions of events were officially closed and refuted. Thus, the investigation in court finally and officially confirmed that the sole cause of the tragedy was Travis Bly's gross negligence and carelessness in handling the dangerous weapon. Despite the clarity and completeness of the court proceedings, some questions nevertheless remained without clear answers. Cooper's future and his further fate remained officially within the competence of social services. So far, there was also no certainty about whether Travis will be able to possess firearms again in the future. Possibly this case will serve as grounds for tightening or clarifying legislation on weapon storage in Australia. The judge emphasized separately that this story should serve as an important and painful lesson for the entire community of hunters and firearm owners. He expressed hope that the publicity of this tragedy will lead people to be more attentive to safety issues, especially when small family members are in the house. The Bly family ultimately remained at the center of society's attentive observation and became a visual example of how small domestic errors and the desire to save time and money can lead to an enormous tragedy. Upon closing the court proceedings, the judge particularly noted that although the legal proceedings are finished, the memory of the tragedy will remain with the family and society for many years. Perhaps this will be exactly what brings many to reflection and changes their attitude towards safety issues. The case of the tragedy on the Bly farm definitively entered history, not only as a sad incident, but also as a serious warning about the consequences of negligent handling of weapons.